Welcome to the Resilience series. I'm Stephanie Weaver, the author of the Migraine Relief Plan and the upcoming Migraine Relief Plan cookbook. And for that project, I'm interviewing a variety of people who are living well with chronic conditions. And my guest today is Kimberly Joy. Kimberly is a physical therapist, restorative yoga teacher, and guided meditation leader. And she's also been living with lupus for over 20 years. Welcome, Kimberly.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's so good to see you. So, how old were you when you were diagnosed with lupus? And for those of us who've heard of it but aren't really sure what it is, can you tell us what it is? And then, how did you feel about that diagnosis?
I was 29 when I was diagnosed, just about 3 months before my 30th birthday. Now that I know what the symptoms are, I actually have had it since I was 27. And lupus is an autoimmune condition that affects the immune system. Basically, the body gets confused, and instead of just attacking viruses and bacteria, it can attack the own cells and tissue in the body. It's a very complex disease because it affects everyone so differently. The symptoms can range from mild to life-threatening, and it is a chronic illness. There is no known cure at this time for lupus.
Okay. And how did you feel when you were diagnosed? So, you're
Uh,
30, you were young. Yeah.
Shocked. My initial reaction was shock. I was actually working as a physical therapist, busy in the middle of treating patients, got a phone call that a doctor was on the line for me, and I assumed it was for one of my patients. And it was for me. And he was very direct and said, I have your lab results. I would like you to see a rheumatologist. I think you have lupus. And it's that split second where everything drops. And then I took the information down and went back to work. I didn't have time at the point to process it. When I did have time, I reacted like I reacted to everything back then, which was, well, I'm just going to fix it. I'm type A. Anything that had been an obstacle in my life before that point, I just methodically moved forward and found the answer, and I'm going to fix it. And for me at that time, since I was trained in Western medicine, my first reaction was to move straight towards Western medicine as treatment plan.
Yeah, makes sense. So, were you already interested in the body mind connection at that point in your life, or did that come later as part of your healing journey?
That came later as part of my healing journey. I would say lupus was the catalyst that put me on that path. I guess my background, I was a psychology major underground, so there was always a little bit of interest in that, but I had no practical practice of it. I also grew up in a secular home, so we didn't go to church. There wasn't a lot of talk about spirituality, and everything I did at that point was kind of left brain and science oriented.
And I can totally relate to being type A and just feeling like, oh, so you gave me this diagnosis. So what do I do to fix it? Well, what do you mean you can't fix it? I'll just work harder. I'll just try more. I'll just push, none of which works. And actually, most of it made me worse. So, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, Kimberly, is because you write for a website called The Mighty, which is for people with chronic illness. And you've written a couple of essays, but one of them really struck me because it was really about sort of learning to love our imperfect bodies. And that was one of the things I really wanted to focus on with you today. What has that been like for you? Because I know you as a wellness person. I know you as someone who projects wellness, certainly. And so, again, like invisible illnesses, like we both have, we may look fine to other people, fine in air quotes, and yet there's many things we have to say no to. So tell me about that.
Um, Learning to love an imperfect body,
Yes.
it was a journey for sure. And I didn't realize it at the time, but when I was in the fix it mode, underneath that was a feeling that I was broken in some way. And there was something then wrong with me because I had an illness that needed to be fixed. And over time, through many different experiences, I came to realize that acceptance was important, and changing my mindset changed how I felt about myself. And one of the things I realized was I used to have my goal at the beginning of this was I'm going to be in complete remission, medication free. And that in a way it was great because it put me on this path of learning all of these tools, some of which you talk about. Diet is a big thing, and inflammation, meditation, all of that. And what I came to start to realize was, oh, I'm trying to, air quote, go back to normal, because then I think if I'm healthy, then I won't be broken. What I realized was that what I need to focus on instead is optimal health. How do I find my optimal health with my particular physiology, my limitations, and what my body needs? And that opened up this whole world. And like the sense of relief started, like I set down rocks off my shoulders of, wait a minute, I'm not broken. I just have to live my life differently. And as I continued to move forward and find tools to help me with optimal health, such as meditation, Chinese medicine and acupuncture were very helpful for me, Ayurvedic medicine, more contemplation and self awareness, looking at my self talk and my belief systems, I came to realize that not only was I not broken, but I have a sense of well-being and inner peace that I didn't have before I had lupus. And I firmly believe that all of us can find a sense of well-being no matter what our external situations are.
That's great. The other thing that occurs to me is that that mindset that I think pretty much everybody has when you get a diagnosis is, well, I want to be fixed and I want to be well. There's the term for that is also ableism, right? So it's this focus of being like that, being whole and healthy is the only way to be in the world. And then there's all those disabled people over there that aren't as worthy because they're, limited by whatever. And, I think we all have that mindset because certainly our culture is very much about that. But realistically, one of my friends used to say, everybody's just a banana peel away from being disabled, right? And everybody's living in an aging body. So regardless of whether right now you happen to have an illness that you're dealing with or not, if you continue living, you will have things that your body does that you're not happy about, that are limitations, whether that's you lose flexibility or you break a bone or you get a chronic thing or whatever. And, you and I were talking before we turned the camera on about how having these chronic conditions has kind of prepared us for the COVID pandemic, because we're used to having limitations. We're used to not going out and seeing people. We're used to doing, most of my work is exactly on this, is a Zoom call. And so it does sort of help to register that the notion of normal for us shifts and it's kind of evolving. And I think that's something that people that aren't dealing with chronic illness maybe don't necessarily feel.
I agree. I agree. That's a very cultural thing to think, oh, if you are healthy, young, you
Yeah,
know,
young,
of a,
big,
of a certain socioeconomic class,
right,
then you're okay.
right.
And so part of the gift in having something, a chronic illness, is realizing that those are societal conditions, but they're not necessarily true.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So you and I met at a writing class, and I know you think a lot about language. So what role do language and self-talk play in your wellness experience and also in your identity? Because I think that's a big part of a lot of what we all deal with.
Mhm. I would answer that in two parts, I think. As far as identities, I learned something really important about identity at the beginning of this whole thing. I had a lot of my identities taken away at a very young age. I was diagnosed young, and one of the first identities that I lost was being an athlete. My whole life I'd been strong and able to do all these things, and that was one of the first things that I lost because of the fatigue, the pain, the inflammation. And then I lost the identity of, oh, I'm a physical therapist because I couldn't practice any longer. And the list went on and on of what I kept losing. But I had a really profound experience when I was in the hospital the first time. I was in a severe lupus flare, and I'd been hospitalized already for about 3.5 weeks. I hadn't been able to eat and was in a lot of pain. And I started to live in this place. I call it the in between. I don't know what else to call it, where I was still in my body, but also somewhat detached from my body. And there was this plane of being that was pure peace and calm and safety and love. And there was no fear, no pain, no resentment. And I came to realize that as my true identity, that
Mm.
that piece, that part of me, and people call it different things, but that is my core, I call it my essence, is my true identity. And so as I move through life now and different identities come and go, I'm less attached and I'm more adaptable and I don't suffer as much when they change. So that's kind of how I think about identities and being more fluid with those and always coming back to my core and finding my well-being there. And it ties perfectly to self-talk because how we talk to ourselves affects how we see ourselves. And one of the biggest resilience practices I have is meditation. It's given me this gift of being able to step back from my thoughts a little bit, see my belief systems from a witness standpoint, and actually hear what I'm saying to myself. And it's a profound practice. And it's once I always say I am able to identify it instead of identify with it. Because once I hear myself talk, I'm no longer believing myself talk. And once I hear it, then I can start to choose how to say things differently. And honestly, one of the things that I happened for me at the beginning of the illness, or maybe somewhere in the middle as I was on my journey, I came to a point where I thought, okay, lupus is the body attacking itself. Where else am I attacking myself?
Mm.
And I started hearing my voices of self judgment, self criticism, all of those things. And it's been a journey and a softening to change those into self compassion, non judgment, and more self love. And it's an ongoing practice every day. But I feel the shift in my entire being with how I talk to myself. Because I think we all feel this when there's any type of judgment or self anger, there's like this tightening, and tightness creates inflammation. And when I can meet myself with kindness and self compassion, there's this softness. And it feels better in my mind and it definitely feels better in my body.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I was relating when you were talking about the in between. For me, when I had that moment, I visualized myself on a purple raft, and all of my bodily aches and pains and thoughts were logs floating along with me, but not in the raft. And that what you described as your essence, that I would agree that's me in the raft, that's the me, and then all the other stuff is extraneous. So
Mhm.
my thoughts floating by, whatever's going on with my body. And I think there is a really true profound, when we have that experience, it does and are open to it and and can go there. Essentially, it changes the dynamic of everything else in our life in a positive way. When I had before I was diagnosed with what turned out to be a broken vertebrae, needed spinal fusion surgery, I was in so much pain I couldn't fall asleep. And I would just lay there. Thankfully, I didn't get addicted to opioids or anything, because that certainly could have happened. But I just would lay there, and all I could think about was how much that hurt, how much that my left hip hurt, how much it hurt. And then one night I just remember thinking, okay, but I'm more than this pain. And that was that moment of that awareness started that separation for me, that detachment that you're talking about. And I was able to just like have a few seconds where there was distance between me and the pain. And then if you focus on that space, it starts to get bigger. And also you often find that the pain will be a lessening of its own experience when you do that. Not
Mhm.
always, but there's something about that process that's really powerful.
I
So thank
agree.
you. Yeah. So thank you for talking about that. How would you describe resilience?
I would describe resilience as the ability to return to center and find a sense of balance after encountering something stressful or disappointing, or for those of us that live with a chronic illness, after experiencing a day or a week or a month of a flare. And when I say return to center and balance, it's that place that we're talking about, returning to the core, the silent space where you can find some spaciousness and a sense of well being outside of your circumstances.
That's great. I love that I get a different answer every time, which is so awesome. That's why I love doing this series. So, my last question is tell us what your self care practice looks like. You've mentioned a few things, but kind of give us the what does self care look like in Kimberly's world?
Oh, self care looks like, I'd say my top three are conscious rest. And I would
Oh,
put
what's that? What's
conscious
conscious
rest
rest?
is I use restorative yoga for that, but my definition is it's finding a time, it's intentional. I think a lot of us that live with chronic illness, we all know what fatigue is, that just bone weary, can't get off the couch, can't get out of bed. And sometimes when I'm like that, or frequently, that I will plop down on the couch and just have an inability to do anything besides stare at the TV or play a game on my phone. But that is still it's you're quote resting because you're not moving and you're still, but there's input and there's stimulus coming in. So your brain is still working, your eyes are still working, you're getting the light from the TV. Conscious rest is an intentional choice to go put your body in a position or situation where you are just going to rest. You're going to rest your body, you're going to rest your mind. I use restorative yoga for that. People can sit in nature. If we live here in California, sit on the sand, put your feet in the water. But for me, restorative yoga, it actually, you're supported by blankets and bolsters in these postures that change your physiology. So it'll slow your heart rate, it'll bring your blood pressure down. More importantly, it changes your nervous system. So it takes you out of the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight, into the parasympathetic, where there's rest and digest. So by consciously and intentionally choosing to rest, you refill the tank. And I think that's how you give resilience to the body. I think there's resilience for the mind, the spirit, and the body. And people with chronic illnesses, our bodies work harder over time, right? And so to give it these times of intentional rest, you kind of put bricks in a foundation that build a resilience for the times that we are in more pain, that we do have more fatigue, or we are in a flare. So conscious rest is probably top of my list.
Okay, that was.
Self-care.
Then what are the other things that are up there?
Meditation,
Okay.
very big for me. Contemplation, and I would say routine. Really taking care. No matter how I sleep, how I feel, I get up every morning. I drink a glass of warm water and I sit and I do my meditation and I do some gentle yoga to work out the kinks. And even on the days that it's the last thing I want to do, I always feel better afterwards. Um, you know, Dietary changes have been helpful. Acupuncture is helpful for me. Ayurvedic medicine is helpful for me. Um, but again, my main three are conscious rest, meditation, and contemplation.
That's great. Thank you. So, Kimberly, thank you again for being here today and sharing your story. Please check out her website, messagesfromjoy.com, to read her writing. And you can also find her on The Mighty. Check out other episodes of the Resilience series on Facebook Watch, IGTV, and YouTube. And you can follow me at SWeaverMPH to keep track of this project and when the book is going to be coming out. The Migraine Relief Plan Cookbook will be out in spring 2022 from Surrey Books. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for being here, Kim.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.